Now, while I intend to serve out my term as a member of Congress from the 7th District of Virginia, effective July 31st, I will be stepping down as Majority Leader. It is with great humility that I do so, knowing the tremendous honor it has been to hold this position.
Well, that was House Majority Leader Eric Cantor moments ago at a news conference just hours after the people of Virginia delivered a fatal blow to the very heart of the Washington elite class, the establishment class, who brazenly thought their terms would never end, no matter how bad things got and no matter how poorly they represented the American people. Eric Cantor got trounced by Dave Bratt, an economics professor who ran on simple yet true conservative ideas.
It wasn't a contest between the Tea Party and the Republicans and all this. Although I had tremendous Tea Party support and just wonderful people in the Tea Party and grassroots helped me out, and they're clearly responsible for the win. But I ran on the Republican principles. And we have this Republican creed in Virginia, and the only problem with the Republican principles is no one's following them.
Well, before the left gets on the soapboxes and declares the GOP in disarray, they should realize Cantor was defeated not by the Tea Party, nor amnesty. Cantor was tripped up by his own inauthenticity, his own disregard for the people of Virginia, and his own greed, a lust to be the next Speaker of the House.
Wow. How do you really feel?
No. I mean, let's face it. Cantor spent $168,000 at steakhouses, which is more than what Bratt spent on his campaign. So he got chucked while eating chuck. He got dethroned while eating a T-bone. He went down on the ground round, and he deserves it.
Did you work on that a lot?
How
today?
meaty.
I did that in the dressing room.
Very meaty.
While pounding coffee.
Did you Google meat puns?
I Googled meat puns. You know, I'm that transparent. I did. But you know what? The big loser, Cantor's,
Did you really?
Cantor's pollster. This guy is about as reliable as a chocolate teapot.
Yeah, they had him.
Did he get his money back?
They had him
I
up
didn't know you
30,
could Google puns.
30 a couple of weeks going into it.
35 points, yeah. This guy probably thought New Coke was going to replace HTO. This guy is gone. But he's blaming the Democrats, right? He's saying the Democrats came and voted in this election.
Which is...
Can you believe they did that?
That's a weak defense of what's going on. Bob, absolute disarray in D.C. Shock across the board.
Right.
How did they miss it so badly?
Well, this is not unusual. Historically, we've had people who have not taken care of their home state or their home districts. They get shocked in a race like this, and one of the problems was he was removed from the 7th District of Virginia. He was not doing his job as a representative. Apparently, his staff did lousy constituent service work, and he was constantly working on, as you say, becoming Speaker or trying to be a national Republican figure. And when something like that happens, people tend back home to get resentful about it. What he should have noticed the last time he had a primary, it was relatively close. And if you're a guy like that, you ought to be saying to yourself, this might be a closer race than I think. And he should have had a better pollster, but he should have been back campaigning. The guy was not back there.
And a lot of the immediate reaction by the left was, see what's going on to the GOP. Look, they're in disarray. See, it was all about immigration. But I'm going to push back a little. Can we say it wasn't necessarily solely about amnesty and immigration? Lindsey Graham, good example.
You know, you're right on that. Opponents of immigration say that it's a win for them. Tea Party patriots say it's a win for them. Democrats say he's too extreme. They're all wrong. Bob is right about the lack of constituent services. There were complaints that they were lousy. But it's the opposite of what everybody's been saying. They're saying that he was too focused on Washington, D.C. and not focused on Virginia enough. The real story is he was hyper-focused on Virginia. Earlier this year, he started a PAC called Young Guns. And what he tried to do, very upset with the direction of the grassroots in Virginia, was to take out these local party chairmen, okay? He lost. He got bludgeoned earlier this year. He lost 4 out of 5 of these races in these congressional districts. These party chairmen, these grassroots winners, then coalesced and united and beat him and put every effort on the ground in Virginia on a grassroots level to beat him in a district of 36,000. This is not about ignoring Virginia. It's about having your priorities wrong and declaring a war in the grassroots of your state, which is politics 101. And Eric Cantor just said, all politics is local. That was the most true statement he said in that entire press conference. He went to war with the grassroots. You cannot do that. Lindsey Graham worked his grassroots, and that's why he won.
KG, last night, I believe it was on Hannity's show, he said, Mr. Bratt said, money doesn't vote, people vote.
Yeah.
And in fact, the numbers bear that out. $200,000, I think he had in his war chest. Eric Cantor, $5 million. And
Look, he ran a smart campaign, a thrifty campaign, and one that mattered at the grassroots level. People didn't feel like ignored, like Eric Cantor was a politician in D.C. that had gone to the Hill and forgotten about the people in his home state. I think this is an important lesson politically, and I'll tell you what, I bet you there's people making calls and making some changes in their campaigns right now with the elections coming up that will also be contested. They're going to be close. That are going to be tough. Rethink the whole thing and don't necessarily trust your pollsters.
You know, the big story here, and Bob, you'll like this.
Yes.
The guy who won is a professor.
yeah, that's true.
Yes.
He's a free market professor. That's like
See
a tall,
that? There
it's like a
you go.
tall leprechaun. But get this, Bob.
They exist.
He's going up against a professor. They're
There you
both
go.
professors.
Aren't they
Makes my
from the
point.
same school, right?
It's like an independent film. One could be Jeff Daniels. I would say the other one would be Philip Seymour Hoffman, but he's dead. But it seems like an art film of some kind.
Listen,
Not the ones that you
let me
used
tell
to
you one
make,
thing.
though.
Let me,
Very
let me push
different.
back with Andrew said a little bit. He's right. He did pay a lot of attention in Virginia, but in other congressional districts, he tried to knock off the chairs in those districts. He didn't spend that much time in his own district. You're right. He got beaten doing that. But he wanted the whole of Virginia to have a grassroots operation. So he went after chairman in
That's
somebody
right.
else's district. And you don't do that. You're exactly right. That's something you don't do. But he was not paying attention to the people who voted in
And
primary.
his top lieutenants were defeated, so he was left with no real grassroots presence. And a lot of people said to him, let bygones be bygones. Let this go. Make peace with the grassroots of your party. And he didn't do that. And my source on the ground says, look, if he wouldn't have pursued this strategy of going to war, he would have, his opponent, Bratt, would have gotten 35%, but he didn't. And even as recently as yesterday, his people were very confident, very cocky. They thought they could take him down, and they said, oh, we're going to win by 20, 30 points.
so awful.
That
Just
assumes that the
so
grassroots in
wrong.
other congressional districts came in and helped. I mean, actually turned out
Bob,
voters.
they did. They worked very, very united to
Interesting.
defeat him. And just a quick point about the Democratic turnout. A lot of people say Democratic turnout wasn't high. That is true in typically African-American districts. But here was the death knell for him. White, rich liberals in an open registration in Virginia, 5,000 to 10,000 of them, showed up at the polls because they hate Eric Cantor more than the Republicans do. So they came out, and that was, I wouldn't say the reason he won, but they certainly aided and abetted that loss.
Well, that's what the pollster for Brad is saying, is that it was liberals that came out and voted because they wanted somebody instead of Cantor.
They wanted
Maybe
Cantor
because
out.
they wanted a more vulnerable candidate to go up against their candidate.
Well,
Maybe for both reasons.
Can we talk about now what? So Eric Cantor says he will support Whip McCarthy. But there are other names that are floated around. There's Paul Ryan. There's others. Anyone? Well, go ahead, Bob.
I was going to say, I think McCarthy's got that one locked up. But the other thing is, one thing that everybody wrote this morning right away, that this was an anti-immigration vote. It was not. The polling that was done there, in fact, showed the people of that district and the people who voted favored the immigration bill that's sitting on the
They
past
weren't
the Senate.
opposed to his approach.
Yeah, no. They were in favor of the bill that passed the
Right.
Senate.
Right.
So it had nothing to do with that. In fact, it was exactly the opposite. But the Republicans here are running like scalded dogs away from immigration because that's what they read.
I think it's more of it's a victory of specifics versus comprehensive. We've always talked about how bad things are when you put comprehensive before. You have comprehensive health care, climate change, immigration, education. Comprehensive always means coercion. And we know that as conservatives and libertarians. When we hear it, we reject that idea. It was more about small, piecemeal advances as opposed to a giant government force taking over.
Well,
That's
can
an
we
interesting thing. I hadn't thought about it.
Can we
Seriously,
stay
I
on
hadn't
that
thought
for a second? Is Eric Cantor? I don't know, the symbol for big government, for the establishment, and, as Andrea points out, is this the grassroots here saying enough of that?
We just hate the word sweeping. Whenever I hear the word sweeping, unless it's about cleaning, I don't want anything to do with it.
Are you banning it?
But my point is there going to be a pushback? Other candidates like Eric Cantor, the establishment, the Boehners, the big names that have been there for countless terms.
Yeah, but
You can expect it, given
most of them have already
victory.
won their primaries. I mean, Boehner won his primary, so it's not. There's very few of them left.
Well, there may be a lot of that may be vulnerable coming up, though.
Yeah, well, I tell you, from my side, what worries me is the turnout. I mean,
Yes.
if that from a Democrat standpoint, I look at that district and I see a turnout that's 30% higher than it was the last primary season, and I say to myself,
You're in
there's a
trouble
lot
there.
of people turning out here, and they ain't turning out for Democrats.
That's good
You're
for
right, Bob.
Republicans.
Yes, that's what I would say. I mean, that's
I think that's
that
the
was my
biggest
very
concern,
first reaction this
right?
morning. Was,
For the Democrats
oh,
coming
absolutely.
out of
That was
this.
my very first thing that hit me. I said,
But
gee,
you
man.
asked a really good. You asked a good question, Eric. Is this going to be a groundswell against big government? I do think on the grassroots level, a lot of local activists and the more conservative wing of the party were very upset at House Republican leadership for the debt ceiling deal that happened last December. And so they do equate them with, look, you guys aren't staying true to the grassroots principles, the conservative principles. Although I will say, I think Boehner's completely safe as Speaker. Bob's absolutely right. I don't see a lot of these guys getting defeated because most of them have won their primaries already.
And who really wants that job?
So stay on Boehner for a second. There were a lot of people who said John Boehner wanted to retire, but he stuck around because he really didn't like Eric Cantor. He didn't want Cantor Speaker of the House.
Those two do not like each other.
Right, they don't get along. Now that Cantor's out of the picture, does that make John Boehner stronger as Speaker, or does that make him say,
Definitely.
my job is done here, I can leave now, I can go retire in Florida?
Well, there's no love lost
I
between
think it's
McCarthy and
stronger.
Boehner either. So, I mean, you never see a speaker who doesn't have a problem with the majority leader. It goes back Democrats or Republicans. I think Boehner was, but I do think he was sort of sending a message about Cantor. And the other thing you notice, he did nothing. He did nothing for Cantor, not a single dollar from the Speaker's fund, nothing. So that's an indication to me. And how you miss this? I mean, Greg's exactly right. If you have a pollster that tells you, I've done almost 100 campaigns. If I'm up 30 points 2 weeks out, it's over. We go home and take a rest.
Show up in your district.
Yeah, but when the polls are open. It's
That's sloppy.
unprecedented.
He stayed in D.C. He
Oh, that's right.
fundraised
Yeah,
during the polls.
exactly.
When the polls were
but I
open.
mean, it's unprecedented to have that kind of shift in a. And what was his favorability rating, which is something everybody should keep in mind about politics. His favorability, his negatives and positives, exactly mirrored what he got as a vote. He had something like 50-some% negative and
But Bob,
40-some%.
don't you think a lot of Republican pollsters got it wrong this last presidential election and completely underestimated the turnout of the Obama organization?
Absolutely.
This
happened.
Who would do that?
As you know better than anyone, it's really tough to figure out where the grassroots turnout's going to be. You can take your polls, but I mean,
Well, that's what happened in Virginia. I mean,
this
that's
is unbelievable how wrong they got it. It is like the presidential.
Got to make everybody feel vulnerable, and I think Bob, you hit it on the head with that, was saying that this is about getting out the vote, and they should be concerned now. That would be my biggest concern if I had a Democratic candidate right now to say, you know what, they're going to mobilize, they're going to get it out, and they're turning out with passion.
I feel vulnerable right now.
Sitting just here at this
I have
table?
to confess, I'm sure there are people out there that are talking about this that had no idea who Dave Bratt was. I never heard of him. We never even did a segment or talk. We never mentioned his name on this show.
We were in the green room before the show yesterday going, is he vulnerable? No, he's got
I thought he was in the Foo Fighters.
No, this is
Laura
just very
Ingraham
quickly. This is a classic example. A large percentage, not a majority, but a large percentage didn't know who they were voting for. They didn't know the guy.
Yeah.
They were in there to vote against Cantor.
Anyone, ABC, right? Anybody but Cantor.
Exactly.
What they said. All right, we're going to have to leave it. By the way, I put a piece up on .com on this exact thing. If you can go there, check it out. Next, is the president's agenda now dead for the remainder of his term? Immigration reform in particular we'll debate. And later, dramatic testimony from Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel defending the Bergdahl terrorist swap. Plus, I told you about this on the show last night. You notice our good friend Bob Eckel isn't here tonight. He took a day off. But tonight, very important, I set him up on a blind date.
Do you
Bob
have high hopes for this?
I have very high hopes. So how did Bob's big blind date go? Was he nervous? Will there be a second date? Stay tuned for all the details coming right up.